Red Mesa, Texas sat like a collection of sun-bleached bones in the middle of endless cattle country. The town had grown quickly over the past 5 years, fueled by the cattle drives heading north and the railroad depot that promised connection to the wider world. With growth came prosperity for some, desperation for others, and a hardening of hearts that seemed to calcify with each passing summer. On a Tuesday morning in July, when the heat already shimmered off the dirt streets by 8 o'clock, a young woman stepped off the morning stage. She wore a simple white dress that somehow remained clean despite the dust, carried a black medical bag, and had an air of quiet observation that made people uncomfortable, without quite knowing why. "Name's Clara Whitfield," she told the hotel clerk, her voice soft but clear. "I'm a traveling nurse looking for work. Heard Red Mesa might need medical help." The clerk, a thin man named Horace, studied her with the suspicion small towns reserve for outsiders. "We got Doc Reynolds. Been here 15 years. Don't need another medical person." "I'm not here to replace anyone," Clara said with a patient smile, "just offering assistance if it's needed. I can pay for my room." Money talked louder than suspicion. Horace took her payment and handed her a key to a second-floor room overlooking Main Street. Clara thanked him and carried her single carpet bag upstairs, leaving the clerk to wonder why a young woman would choose to travel alone to a hard town like Red Mesa. What Horace didn't know, what nobody in Red Mesa knew, was that Clara Whitfield wasn't really a traveling nurse. She was something far more unusual, the only daughter of cattle baron Thomas Whitfield, who owned the largest ranch in 3 counties and was looking to invest heavily in one lucky town. But Thomas Whitfield had made his fortune by reading people, not just markets, and he'd taught his daughter to do the same. "A town's character isn't found in its buildings or its bank accounts," he'd told Clara before she left on this journey. "It's found in how people treat strangers, especially strangers who can't do anything for them in return. I'm considering Red Mesa for our expansion, but I need to know what kind of people live there. So you go, daughter. Watch, listen. Test their hearts when they don't know they're being tested." Clara stood at her window, watching Red Mesa go about its business. The saloon already had customers despite the early hour. The general store was busy with ranchers' wives buying supplies. A group of cowboys lounged outside the telegraph office, smoking and talking. Everything looked normal, prosperous even, but Clara had learned that surfaces lied. The real measure of a place revealed itself in moments of crisis, in choices made when nobody important was watching. She'd visited 3 other towns before Red Mesa, and all 3 had failed her father's test in different ways. She wondered what this town would reveal. She didn't have to wait long to find out. Around noon, when the heat had driven most people indoors, Clara heard shouting from the street. She moved to her window and saw a man stumbling down Main Street, clearly in distress. His clothes were torn and blood-stained, his face burned red by sun exposure, his movements uncoordinated and desperate. "Water," the man called out, his voice cracking. "Please, someone, water." He collapsed in the middle of the street, raising a small cloud of dust. Clara watched, her hand on the window frame, waiting to see what Red Mesa would do. People emerged from buildings, drawn by the commotion. But instead of rushing to help, they stopped at a careful distance. Clara could hear fragments of conversation drifting up to her window. "That's Jake Morrison. Works for the Circle T Ranch. Looks half dead. Wonder what happened to him." But nobody moved to help. Nobody offered the water the dying man had begged for. They just watched, curious but unwilling to get involved, as if suffering was entertainment rather than emergency. Clara made her decision in 3 seconds. She grabbed her medical bag and a pitcher of water from her washstand and headed for the stairs. As she pushed through the hotel door into the blazing heat, she heard Horace call after her, "Miss Whitfield, you don't want to get involved in—" But Clara was already kneeling beside the fallen cowboy, lifting his head, pressing the water pitcher to his cracked lips. "Easy," she murmured. "Small sips. You're going to be all right." The crowd watched in silence as this stranger in white tended to one of their own, doing what none of them had been willing to do. And Clara watched them right back, reading faces, noting reactions, beginning her assessment of Red Mesa's true character. Jake Morrison's eyes flickered open, focusing slowly on Clara's face above him. "Angel?" he whispered, confusion evident in his delirium. "Not an angel. Just a nurse," Clara replied, supporting his head as she helped him drink more water. What happened to you? Ambushed. 3 days ago. Been walking. So thirsty. His words came in fragments between desperate gulps of water. Clara examined him quickly. Severe dehydration, exposure, and what looked like a bullet graze across his ribs. Serious but survivable with proper care. She looked up at the crowd of onlookers who'd formed a wide circle around them. "Someone help me get him to the doctor's office," she called out. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but nobody stepped forward. Clara saw faces turn away, people suddenly finding reasons to be elsewhere. Within moments, the crowd had thinned considerably, leaving only a handful of curious spectators maintaining their careful distance. "Well?" Clara demanded, anger creeping into her voice despite her intention to remain neutral. "Is nobody going to help?" An older woman in an expensive dress finally spoke, her tone defensive. "Jake Morrison is trouble, miss. Always has been. Getting involved with his problems isn't wise." "He's a human being who needs help," Clara countered. "He's a drunk and a troublemaker," a shopkeeper added from the safety of his doorway. "Probably got shot in some dispute he started himself." Clara felt disgust rising but pushed it down. This was exactly why her father had sent her, to see how towns really behaved when tested. Red Mesa was failing spectacularly, but her job was to observe, not to judge aloud. "Not yet, fine," she said coldly. "I'll manage alone." She was trying to figure out how to move Jake when a voice spoke behind her. "I'll help." Clara turned to see a young man, probably in his early 20s, stepping forward from where he'd been leaning against a post. He was lean and weathered, dressed in simple ranch handclothes with thoughtful brown eyes that seemed out of place in his sun-hardened face. "Name's Daniel Carter," he said, kneeling on Jake's other side. "Doc Reynolds' office is 3 buildings down. We can carry him between us if you take his legs." Together they maneuvered Jake off the ground and began the awkward journey down the boardwalk. Clara noticed that people actually stepped back to avoid them, as if Jake's troubles might be contagious. Doc Reynolds turned out to be a competent but weary man in his 60s, who'd clearly seen too much of human nature to be surprised by anything. He helped them get Jake onto an examination table and immediately began assessing the damage. "Dehydration, exposure, and a bullet wound," Doc Reynolds confirmed. "He'll live, but it was close. Another few hours in that sun and we'd be digging a grave." He looked at Clara with new respect. "You probably saved his life, Miss Whitfield." "Clara Whitfield. Well, Miss Whitfield, Red Mesa should be grateful to you, though I suspect they won't be." He turned to Daniel. "And you, Carter. Didn't think you'd be the one to step up. Your boss won't be happy about you helping Jake." "My boss doesn't control my conscience," Daniel replied quietly. Doc Reynolds smiled grimly. "That's a luxury most folks around here can't afford. Or won't afford. Comes to the same thing in the end." As the doctor worked on Jake, Clara studied Daniel. He'd been the only one to help, the only one willing to go against the town's obvious collective decision to let Jake suffer. That meant something. "Why did everyone turn away?" Clara asked. "That woman said Jake was trouble, but surely that doesn't justify leaving him to die." Daniel and Doc Reynolds exchanged a look. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Jake works for the Circle T Ranch. Used to be the biggest ranch around here, but it's been struggling since old Thomas Circle died last year. His daughter tried to keep it going, but..." He shrugged. "The other ranches, especially the Bar M, have been, let's say, acquiring Circle T land and cattle through methods that aren't exactly legal but hard to prove. Jake's been speaking up about it," Doc Reynolds added, cleaning the bullet wound. "Making accusations. Making himself unpopular with powerful people. In a town where the Bar M Ranch owns half the businesses and employs half the workers, speaking against them is dangerous. So the town chose sides," Clara said, understanding crystallizing. "And Jake was on the losing side." "That's about it," Daniel confirmed. "And anyone who helps him becomes suspect too. That's why folks stayed back, not because they're all heartless, but because they're afraid." "Fear doesn't excuse indifference," Clara said firmly. "No," Daniel agreed. "But it explains it." Jake stirred on the table, consciousness returning slowly. His eyes found Clara's face and recognition flickered. "You helped me. Why?" "Because you needed help," Clara said simply. "What happened to you out there?" Jake's expression darkened. "Was riding fence line for Circle T. 3 men jumped me, beat me, took my horse and supplies. Told me to deliver a message to Miss Sarah at the ranch. Sell out, or next time they won't leave anyone alive to carry messages. He coughed, wincing at the pain. I tried to walk back but got turned around, ended up here instead. Who were the men? Doc Reynolds asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Wore masks, but I recognized the voice of one of them. Works for Bar M man named Dutch Henderson. Daniel and Doc Reynolds exchanged another significant look. That's serious accusation, Jake, Doc Reynolds said quietly. You'd better be certain before you repeat that anywhere public. I'm certain, Jake said stubbornly. And I ain't keeping quiet just because it's inconvenient for folks. Clara listened to all of this, her assessment of Red Mesa growing darker. This wasn't just a town with a hard edge. This was a community that had actively chosen corruption over justice, safety over righteousness, because standing up required courage most people didn't possess. That evening, Clara sat in the hotel dining room, a small notebook hidden in her lap beneath the table. She'd developed a system over her visits to the previous towns: observe, document, assess. Her father would want details, not just impressions. So far, Red Mesa was painting a troubling picture. A town dominated by fear, a powerful ranch using intimidation to expand, good people staying silent because speaking up came with consequences. And in the middle of it all, a dying man left in the street because helping him meant choosing the wrong side. The dining room was busy, filled with ranchers, merchants, and their families enjoying their evening meals. Clara listened to conversations around her, noting who spoke to whom, which tables seemed to command respect, who got the best service from the harried waitress. At the largest table sat a man Clara pegged immediately as someone important. He was in his 50s, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. 3 other men sat with him, clearly subordinates despite their attempts to appear equal. That's Randall Mitchell, the waitress whispered when she brought Clara's meal. Owns the Bar M ranch, richest man in Red Mesa. I see, Clara said, keeping her tone neutral. Impressive. The waitress, a woman in her 30s named Beth, lingered, clearly wanting to talk. You're the one who helped Jake Morrison today. That was brave or foolish. Most folks haven't decided which yet. Does it matter? Clara asked. In this town, everything matters. Every choice you make, every person you associate with, it all gets noted and filed away. That's how life works here. Beth lowered her voice further. Be careful, Miss Whitfield. Being kind to the wrong people can make your life very difficult. Noted, Clara said dryly. Though I generally find that kindness is never wrong, regardless of who receives it. Beth smiled sadly. That's a nice philosophy, but it doesn't put food on the table or keep a roof over your head. I got 3 kids to feed. Can't afford to lose this job because I helped someone Randall Mitchell has decided to hate. After Beth moved away, Clara continued her observations. She saw Randall Mitchell notice her, saw him speak to one of his companions while gesturing in her direction. The man nodded and rose, approaching Clara's table with practiced friendliness. Miss Whitfield, isn't it? I'm Henry Carson, foreman of the Bar M ranch. Mr. Mitchell would like to extend an invitation for you to join his table. He likes to welcome newcomers to Red Mesa personally. It was phrased as an invitation, but Clara recognized a summons when she heard one. She gathered her notebook, tucked it away, and followed Henry to the prominent table. Randall Mitchell stood as she approached, the picture of Western gentility. Miss Whitfield, a pleasure. Please sit. I understand you arrived this morning and have already made quite an impression. Clara sat, acutely aware of the eyes on their table. I simply helped someone who needed it. Jake Morrison, Mitchell said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Yes, that's the talk of the town. Very compassionate of you. Though I should warn you, as a friend, that Jake isn't the most reliable character. Man has a drinking problem and a tendency to make wild accusations. He seemed quite coherent when I helped him, Clara said evenly. Dehydration can make anyone seem desperate, Mitchell continued smoothly. I'm sure whatever story he told you was greatly exaggerated. Jake's been angry ever since the Circle T started failing, looking for someone to blame besides himself. Clara sipped her water, saying nothing. Her father had taught her that silence often revealed more than questions. Mitchell leaned forward slightly. Miss Whitfield, Red Mesa is a good town with good people. We've worked hard to build something prosperous here, but prosperity requires order, and order requires that everyone knows their place and accepts certain realities. Jake Morrison refuses to accept reality. That makes him dangerous, not just to himself, but to everyone around him. I see, Clara said. And what is the reality he refuses to accept? That the Circle T is finished, that his employer, Miss Sarah Circle, should sell what's left of her ranch and move on. That fighting against inevitable change only causes suffering. Mitchell's expression remained friendly, but steel entered his voice. I'd hate to see a kind young woman like yourself get caught up in a losing battle that isn't her concern. The message was clear. Help Jake or people like him, and there would be consequences. Clara felt anger simmer but kept her face neutral. This was exactly the kind of intimidation her father needed to know about. Thank you for the advice, Mr. Mitchell, Clara said, standing. I appreciate your concern for my well-being. If you'll excuse me, I'm quite tired from my journey. Of course, Mitchell said, standing as well. Welcome to Red Mesa, Miss Whitfield. I hope your stay here will be pleasant and brief. As Clara walked away, she felt Mitchell's eyes following her. She'd just been warned, politely but unmistakably. The question was, how would Red Mesa react when she ignored that warning? Back in her room, Clara added extensive notes to her journal. Then she did something her father hadn't specifically authorized, but which she felt was necessary. She began planning not just to observe Red Mesa's character, but to actively test it. If this town could be saved, if there were enough good people, beneath the surface of fear and intimidation, they needed an opportunity to show it. And Clara was going to give them that opportunity, whether they wanted it or not. The next morning, Clara visited the general store, run by a middle-aged couple named Harold and Margaret Weaver. The store was well-stocked and efficient, serving as the town's primary supplier of everything from flour to fabric. Margaret was helping a customer when Clara entered, but Harold approached immediately, his expression wary. Word had clearly spread about Clara's defiance of Randall Mitchell's implicit warnings. Morning, Miss Whitfield, Harold said cautiously. What can I help you with? I need supplies, Clara said, pulling out a list she'd prepared. Bandages, medicines, food staples, enough for several people for about 2 weeks. Harold's eyebrows rose. That's quite a bit. Stocking up? In a manner of speaking. I'm planning to ride out to the Circle T ranch. From what I understand, they could use some assistance. The store went quiet. Margaret stopped mid-sentence with her customer. Harold's face paled. Miss Whitfield, that's not a wise decision. Nevertheless, it's my decision to make. Do you understand what you'd be getting yourself into? Harold asked urgently. The Circle T is in trouble, deep trouble. Randall Mitchell wants that land, and he's not a man who accepts defeat graciously. Anyone who helps the Circle T is making an enemy of the most powerful man in the county. I'm a nurse, Clara said simply. I go where I'm needed. The Circle T has people who need medical attention from what I've heard. That's reason enough. Harold looked at his wife, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Margaret spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. We'll fill your order, Miss Whitfield, but we'd appreciate it if you didn't mention where you bought these supplies. Clara felt a mix of disappointment and understanding. The Weavers were willing to help, but only in secret, only if they could maintain plausible deniability. It was better than nothing, but it revealed the depth of fear that controlled this town. Of course, Clara agreed. As Harold began gathering supplies, a commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Through the store window, Clara saw Daniel Carter being confronted by 2 of Mitchell's ranch hands in the street. You helped that troublemaker yesterday, one of them was saying loudly enough for the whole street to hear. Mr. Mitchell wants to know if you're planning to make a habit of choosing the wrong side. Daniel stood his ground, though Clara could see tension in his shoulders. I helped a man who was dying. That's not choosing sides. That's being human. In this town there's no difference, the second ranch hand said. You work for the Bar M now, Carter. You'd do well to remember that. I work for the Bar M as a ranch hand, Daniel replied evenly. That doesn't mean Mr. Mitchell owns my conscience or my choices outside of work hours. The first ranch hand stepped closer, intimidating. Maybe you need time to reconsider what your choices mean. You're suspended. 1 week, no pay. Think about whether working for the Bar M is worth throwing away for people who can't help themselves. They walked away, leaving Daniel standing in the street, clearly shaken but unbowed. Clara made a decision. She walked out of the store and approached him. "Mr. Carter," she called, "I need to hire someone to drive a supply wagon to the Circle T ranch. Would you be available?" Daniel turned, surprise evident on his face. Then understanding dawned, followed by something that might have been gratitude or admiration. "Miss Whitfield, you're making things difficult for yourself. That seems to be my talent," Clara replied. "Are you available or not?" "I'm suspended from my job. Got no immediate prospects, and helping you will probably ensure I never work for the Bar M again." Daniel smiled. "So yes, I'm definitely available." Over the next 2 hours, as Harold Weaver loaded supplies onto a rented wagon, more people approached Clara with quiet offers of help. Beth, the waitress, brought food. Doc Reynolds contributed medical supplies. A young widow named Mrs. Patterson donated blankets she'd been saving. None of them wanted credit. None of them wanted their names attached. But they were helping in their small hidden ways. It was both encouraging and heartbreaking. Good people existed in Red Mesa, but fear kept them in shadows, helping only when they thought they could avoid consequences. By noon, the wagon was loaded. Clara and Daniel prepared to depart, very much aware that the whole town was watching. As they climbed onto the wagon seat, Randall Mitchell himself appeared standing in the middle of Main Street. "Miss Whitfield," he called out. "A word before you go?" Clara considered ignoring him, but decided that would accomplish nothing. She climbed down and approached, Daniel following a step behind. "You're making a mistake," Mitchell said without preamble. "The Circle T is finished. Helping them only prolongs the inevitable and makes enemies you can't afford." "Mr. Mitchell," Clara replied calmly, "I've been in Red Mesa for less than 2 days, and I've learned something interesting about your town. You have good people here, kind people, compassionate people, but they're all terrified of you. That's not prosperity. That's tyranny dressed up in fancy clothes." Mitchell's face darkened. "Careful, young lady. You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Clara said. "A bully who's used fear to control an entire community. Well, I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Mitchell. And maybe, just maybe, when people see that you can be stood up to, they'll find their own courage." "Brave words," Mitchell said coldly. "Let's see if you still feel brave after a few days at the Circle T. That place is cursed. Everyone who tries to help them ends up regretting it." Clara climbed back onto the wagon. "Then I guess I'll be the exception." As they drove out of Red Mesa, Daniel spoke quietly. "You realize you just made a powerful enemy." "I realize I just exposed a powerful fraud," Clara corrected. "Men like Mitchell only have power because good people give it to them. It's time Red Mesa learned that." Daniel glanced at her curiously. "You're not really just a traveling nurse, are you?" Clara smiled slightly. "Does it matter?" "Probably not. But whoever you are, I'm glad you came to Red Mesa. This town's needed someone to shake things up for a long time." The ride to the Circle T took 3 hours across rolling Texas prairie that shimmered with heat. As they traveled, Daniel filled Clara in on the ranch's history. Thomas Circle was one of the first ranchers in this territory, Daniel explained. Built the Circle T from nothing. Honest man, fair employer, respected by everyone. When he died suddenly last year, his daughter Sarah inherited everything. She's only 23, but she's smart and determined. Problem is, she's young and alone, and men like Mitchell see that as opportunity. How has he been taking her land? Clara asked. Every way you can imagine. Legal challenges claiming her father's will was invalid. Cattle mysteriously disappearing and showing up with Bar M brands. Water rights disputes. Intimidation of her ranch hands until most of them quit. Whatever Jake told you about the ambush, that's just the latest escalation. Mitchell's getting impatient. As they crested a hill, the Circle T ranch came into view. It had clearly been impressive once. A solid main house, multiple outbuildings, good corrals. But Clara could see the signs of struggle. Fences in need of repair, empty corrals that should have held cattle, a general air of barely maintained survival. A young woman emerged from the main house as they approached, a rifle held with comfortable familiarity. She was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and determined eyes that assessed them instantly. "Daniel Carter," she called out. "Didn't expect to see you out here. Mitchell finally fire you?" "Suspended," Daniel replied, pulling the wagon to a stop. "Miss Sarah, this is Clara Whitfield." She's a nurse and she's brought supplies. Thought you might could use some help. Sarah's expression shifted from suspicion to confusion to cautious hope. Why would you help us? You don't even know us. Clara climbed down from the wagon. I've been in Red Mesa 2 days. That's been long enough to understand what's happening and to decide whose side I'm on. Sides, Sarah said bitterly. Always about sides. Well, Miss Whitfield, I appreciate the sentiment, but helping us might be the worst decision you've made. Mitchell destroys anyone who stands with us. You sure you want that? Quite sure, Clara replied. Now shall we unload these supplies, or would you prefer to debate the wisdom of kindness while they bake in the sun? Despite everything, Sarah smiled. You've got spine. I like that. Come on, let's get everything inside. The ranch house interior revealed more signs of struggle. Furniture that had once been fine was now worn. Rooms that should have been bustling were empty. But it was clean, organized, and maintained with the stubborn pride of someone refusing to surrender. I've got 4 ranch hands left, Sarah explained as they unpacked supplies. Jake Morrison, who you already met. Tom Reed, who's 60, and stayed because he worked for my father for 30 years. Miguel Santos, who has nowhere else to go. And Billy Green, who's barely 17 and too young to know better. That's it. That's all that's left of a crew that used to be 30 men. What about you? Clara asked. Do you have family? Anyone who could help? My mother died when I was young. No siblings. Father's family is back east, and made it clear they think I should sell out and come live with them in civilization. Sarah's tone made clear what she thought of that option. This ranch is my heritage. My father built it with his own hands. I'm not going to let men like Mitchell take it just because I'm young and female. Over the next few hours, Clara met the rest of the Circle T's small crew. Jake was recovering thanks to Doc Reynolds' care, though he was still weak. Tom Reed was a weathered cowboy with eyes that had seen everything and a loyalty that ran deeper than self-interest. Miguel was quiet and competent, clearly grateful for any work that allowed him to feed his family. Billy was enthusiastic and brave in the way only the very young can be. They were good people, Clara realized, and they were losing because the whole town had decided that helping them was too dangerous. That evening, as they sat around the ranch house table sharing a simple meal, Sarah asked the question Clara had been expecting. Why are you really doing this, Miss Whitfield? The truth, please. Nobody risks themselves for strangers without reason. Clara made a decision. These people deserved honesty. My father is Thomas Whitfield. He owns one of the largest ranches in Texas. He's looking to expand, possibly investing heavily in a town somewhere in this territory. He sent me to evaluate Red Mesa, to see what kind of community it was. The table went silent. Everyone stared at her. Your father is Thomas Whitfield, Sarah said slowly. The Thomas Whitfield who owns half of South Texas? That's him, Clara confirmed. He believes you can judge a town by how it treats people who can't fight back. So he sent me to watch, to see who Red Mesa really is when tested. And, Sarah asked, what have you seen? A town full of good people paralyzed by fear. A town where doing the right thing has become dangerous because one man decided it should be. A town that's failing a test it doesn't even know it's taking. Clara met Sarah's eyes. But I've also seen people willing to help, even if only in secret. And I've seen you, refusing to give up even when you're outnumbered and outgunned. That tells me something important. What's that? Daniel asked. That Red Mesa might still be worth saving, but only if enough people find their courage. Clara paused. My father's investment could transform this town, bring jobs, prosperity, stability. But he won't invest in a community that surrendered its soul. I came here to observe and report, but I've decided to do more than that. I'm going to give Red Mesa one clear, undeniable test, and their response will determine everything. What kind of test? Tom asked suspiciously. Clara smiled. The kind that will force everyone in town to choose, stand with what's right or stand with what's easy. No more hiding, no more helping in secret. One clear choice that defines who they really are. Sarah leaned forward. You have a plan. I have a plan, Clara confirmed. But it's risky, and it will require all of us working together. Are you willing? Sarah looked at her small crew. Tom nodded first. Miguel crossed himself and nodded. Billy grinned and nodded enthusiastically. Jake, still weak but determined, nodded as well. Daniel nodded last, his expression serious but committed. We're willing, Sarah said. What do you need us to do? Clara's plan was simple in concept, but risky in execution. She would throw a public gathering at the Circle T ranch, inviting everyone in Red Mesa to attend. A community celebration, she'd call it. Free food, music, and a chance for neighbors to come together. You're insane, Sarah said when Clara finished explaining. Nobody will come. Mitchell will make sure of that. Maybe, Clara agreed. Or maybe people are tired of being told what to do. We won't know until we try. But here's the key. We're not just inviting them to a party. We're inviting them to take a public stand. Coming to the Circle T will mean choosing your side over Mitchell's, not helping in secret anymore. Making a real choice. And if nobody comes, Jake asked, then we'll know Red Mesa has completely surrendered to fear, and my father will invest elsewhere. But if people do come, even a few, it proves something important. Courage can be contagious. One person standing up makes it easier for the next person, and the next until suddenly a whole town has found its spine. Daniel nodded slowly. It's clever. You're not asking them to fight Mitchell directly. Just asking them to come to a party. It makes it seem less threatening. But it is threatening, Tom pointed out. Mitchell will see it as direct defiance. He'll retaliate. Probably, Clara agreed. But that's part of the test, too. How he retaliates, and how the town responds to that retaliation, will tell us everything we need to know. Over the next 3 days, they prepared. Sarah used some of her dwindling funds to buy supplies. Miguel's wife and daughters came to help cook. Tom and Billy cleaned and organized the ranch yard. Clara and Daniel rode into Red Mesa to personally deliver invitations. The responses they received ranged from incredulous to horrified. Most people politely declined immediately. Some took the invitations but wouldn't commit. A few slammed doors in their faces. But a handful, a small precious handful, said they would try to come if they could. Randall Mitchell, unsurprisingly, was furious. He confronted Clara and Daniel in the street when they were posting notices about the gathering on the community board. This is your final warning, Miss Whitfield, Mitchell said, his usual polish replaced with open anger. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but it ends now. Cancel this gathering or face consequences. What consequences? Clara asked calmly. You'll forbid people from attending a party? On what authority? You're not a king, Mr. Mitchell, despite acting like one. I'm the man who keeps this town prosperous, Mitchell shot back. I employ half the people here. I control access to markets and supplies. I could ruin every person who attends your little party, and we both know it. Then do it, Clara challenged. Show everyone exactly who you are. Prove that Red Mesa is really just your personal kingdom, where people only do what you allow. I'm sure that will make people respect you more, not less. Mitchell leaned in close, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. You're playing with forces you don't understand, little girl. I built this town. I made these people's lives comfortable. They'll choose me over you every time, because I'm the one who can actually help them. We'll see, Clara replied. 3 days from now at the Circle T Ranch, everyone's invited. Let's find out who Red Mesa really is. As Mitchell stormed off, Daniel spoke quietly. You just made this very personal for him. He won't let this go unanswered. Good, Clara said. I want him angry. Angry people make mistakes, and I want everyone in Red Mesa to see what happens when someone challenges his control. They need to see that the consequences aren't as terrible as they've been imagining. The day of the gathering arrived with typical Texas heat. The Circle T crew had transformed the ranch yard into something festive despite their limited resources. Tables were set up with food that Miguel's family had prepared. Tom had even managed to find an old fiddle and convinced Billy that he could play it well enough for dancing. By noon, everything was ready. The question was, would anyone come? Clara stood on the porch with Sarah, both women trying to hide their nervousness. Daniel, Tom, Jake, Miguel, and Billy were positioned around the yard, attempting to look casual while clearly watching the road. If nobody shows up, Sarah said quietly, you tried. That's more than anyone else has done. Someone will come, Clara replied with more confidence than she felt. People are better than they think they are. They just need permission to prove it. An hour passed, then another. The food sat untouched. The fiddle remained silent. Clara felt her confidence beginning to waver. Maybe she'd miscalculated. Maybe fear really had won completely. Then Daniel called out, "Wagon coming!" Everyone's heads turned toward the road. A single wagon approached, moving slowly as if the driver was still debating whether to continue or turn back. As it got closer, Clara recognized the passengers, Harold and Margaret Weaver from the general store. The wagon pulled into the yard and Harold climbed down, looking nervous but determined. "We figured somebody ought to come," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Can't let you go to all this trouble for nothing." Margaret climbed down beside him, carrying a covered dish. "Besides, I brought my special cornbread. Would be a shame to waste it." Clara felt tears sting her eyes but blinked them away. "You have no idea how much this means." "Oh, we have some idea," Harold said. "That's why we almost didn't come. But Margaret reminded me that my daddy didn't raise me to be a coward. So here we are." Within 15 minutes, 2 more wagons arrived. Beth, the waitress with her 3 children, and Mrs. Patterson, the widow with her teenage son. They'd clearly coordinated, arriving together for safety in numbers. "Couldn't stay away," Beth said, though her eyes darted nervously toward the road. "Besides, my kids needed to see that doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard." More people trickled in over the next hour. Not the flood Clara had hoped for, but not the empty gathering she'd feared. By mid-afternoon, maybe 20 townspeople had arrived, less than 10% of Red Mesa's population, but it was something. It was a start. The gathering took on a life of its own. Tom played his fiddle while people danced. Children ran and played, freed temporarily from the tension that usually gripped the town. Adults talked and laughed, rediscovering the sense of community they'd lost to fear. Clara moved through the crowd, observing, noting who had come and what it had cost them. These people were heroes, she realized, even if they didn't know it. They'd chosen principle over safety, community over self-interest. This was the information her father needed. Red Mesa had good people. They just needed leadership that valued courage over control. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, Daniel approached Clara with concern on his face. "Riders coming. A lot of them." The festive atmosphere evaporated instantly. People stopped dancing, stopped talking, turned toward the road where a group of at least 15 riders approached. Leading them was Randall Mitchell. The riders surrounded the ranch yard, creating an intimidating presence. Mitchell dismounted, his expression cold as he surveyed the gathering. "Well," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard. "Look at this. A regular little rebellion. How quaint." He walked slowly through the crowd, and Clara saw people shrink back, fear reasserting itself. Mitchell stopped in front of Harold Weaver. "Harold, Margaret, I'm disappointed. After all I've done for this town, after providing you with business and prosperity, this is how you repay me? By siding with my enemies?" "We're not siding with anyone," Harold said, though his voice trembled. "We just came to a gathering." "That's not illegal." "No," Mitchell agreed, "but it is revealing. It shows me who I can trust and who I can't." He turned to address the entire gathering. "I want everyone here to understand something. The Circle T is finished. Sarah's Circle will lose this ranch. Whether through bankruptcy or foreclosure doesn't matter. She's lost. And everyone who stands with her will lose too." "That's enough," Clara said, stepping forward. "You've made your point, Mr. Mitchell. You're powerful and we're not. We all understand that. But you know what? These people came anyway. They knew you'd be angry, knew there would be consequences, and they came anyway. And that tells me something important about them and about you." Mitchell turned his full attention to Clara, anger barely controlled. "And what does it tell you, Miss Whitfield?" "That they're braver than you thought. That your control isn't as absolute as you believed. And that threatening them just proves exactly what kind of man you are." Clara moved to stand beside Sarah. "You want the Circle T? You'll have to take it. But you won't take their dignity. You won't take their choice. And you won't take their community." "Brave words," Mitchell said coldly. "Let's see how brave you all feel when you're dealing with real consequences. Beth, you're fired. Effective immediately. Harold, Margaret, I'll be moving my business and encouraging others to move theirs to the new general store opening in Millerville. Mrs. Patterson, your lease on that house you rent, it's owned by my company. Consider this your eviction notice." Gasps and cries of dismay rippled through the crowd. Clara felt her heart sink as she watched Mitchell systematically destroy the lives of people who'd shown courage. This was the price of standing up, and it was higher than she'd anticipated. But then something unexpected happened. Daniel Carter stepped forward. "You forgot me, Mr. Mitchell. I'm already suspended, but I helped organize this gathering. Don't I get threatened too? Tom Reed stepped forward next. And I work for the Circle T, figure I'm already on your list. Then, to everyone's surprise, Harold Weaver stepped forward, his fear replaced with anger. You know what, Randall? Do your worst. I've been afraid of you for 5 years. I'm tired of it. Open your new store. I'll compete. Maybe I'll lose, but at least I'll lose knowing I stood for something. Beth stepped forward, tears in her eyes but determination in her voice. I got kids to feed, but I also got to look them in the eye every day. I want them to know their mama stood up when it mattered. One by one, others stepped forward. Not everyone. Some were already backing toward their wagons, fear winning out. But enough. Enough to prove that Red Mesa hadn't completely surrendered. Mitchell's face darkened with rage as he realized his threats weren't having the intended effect. You're all fools. You're choosing poverty and struggle over prosperity and peace. For what? For some outdated notion of principle? Yes, Clara said simply. Exactly for that. The morning after the gathering, Red Mesa woke to face the consequences of defiance. True to his word, Randall Mitchell began systematically punishing those who'd attended the Circle T celebration. Beth arrived at the hotel restaurant where she worked to find the doors locked and a note informing her that her services were no longer needed. Mrs. Patterson found an eviction notice nailed to her door, giving her 30 days to vacate. Harold and Margaret Weaver watched as longtime customers suddenly found reasons to shop elsewhere, their store growing emptier by the hour. Clara sat in her hotel room, documenting everything with growing fury. This was exactly what she'd feared. Good people suffering for doing the right thing. Her test was working, revealing both the courage in Red Mesa's citizens and the ruthlessness of the man controlling them. But the human cost was becoming unbearable. A knock at her door interrupted her writing. She opened it to find Daniel, his expression grim. Sarah sent me to town to check on everyone. It's bad, Clara, really bad. People are scared. Some are saying they wish they'd never gone to the Circle T. They're angry at us for putting them in this position. Clara felt guilt twist in her stomach. I never intended for people to suffer like this. Didn't you? Daniel asked, not unkindly. You said you wanted to test them. Well, this is what real testing looks like. Not hypothetical choices, but actual consequences. The question is, what do we do now? Before Clara could answer, another knock came. This time it was Doc Reynolds, looking older and more tired than usual. Miss Whitfield, you'd better come. There's a town meeting being called at the church. Mitchell's idea. He's forcing a public vote on whether the town should formally condemn the Circle T and anyone who supports it. He's making people choose sides officially. Clara grabbed her shawl. Then let's not keep them waiting. The church was packed when they arrived. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls. The atmosphere was tense, fearful. Randall Mitchell stood at the front, looking like a preacher about to deliver judgment. Thank you all for coming, Mitchell began, as Clara, Daniel, and Doc Reynolds found space near the back. Recent events have forced us to address a problem that's been festering in our community. We have people among us who are actively working against Red Mesa's prosperity and peace. He let that sit for a moment, before continuing. The Circle T Ranch is a failed enterprise. Keeping it alive only prolongs inevitable collapse. Worse, it's become a rallying point for rebellion against the legitimate business interests that keep this town thriving. I propose that we, as a community, formally declare that the Circle T and its supporters are not welcome in Red Mesa, that we cut all ties, all business, all support. That we make it clear, you're either with this town's future or you're against it. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, but Clara also heard notes of dissent. The town was dividing before her eyes. A hand rose in the middle section. It was Harold Weaver. Mitchell nodded, allowing him to speak. With respect, Mr. Mitchell, what you're proposing sounds an awful lot like mob rule. Forcing people to choose sides, threatening their livelihoods if they don't comply. That's not how a decent community operates. It's exactly how a smart community operates, Mitchell countered. Unity requires that everyone moves in the same direction. Those who refuse to move with us become obstacles. And obstacles must be removed. By removed, you mean destroyed, Clara called out from the back. All heads turned toward her. Let's be honest about what you're proposing, Mr. Mitchell. You want to ruin anyone who doesn't submit to your control. That's not unity. That's tyranny. Mitchell's expression hardened. Miss Whitfield, the outsider who's caused all this trouble. Tell me, what gives you the right to come to our town and stir up conflict? What business is this of yours? Clara had been waiting for this moment. She'd debated whether to reveal her true identity, but now she realized it was time. She moved forward through the crowd until she stood at the front, facing Mitchell directly. My name is Clara Whitfield. My father is Thomas Whitfield, owner of the Whitfield Cattle Company. Perhaps you've heard of him? The reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, eyes widening with recognition. Even Mitchell looked momentarily shaken. My father sent me here to evaluate Red Mesa as a potential location for a major expansion of his operations, Clara continued, addressing the entire assembly now. He's prepared to invest substantially in the right community, bringing jobs, contracts, prosperity that would transform this entire region. But he only invests in places that meet his standards. She turned to face the crowd fully. He taught me that you judge a town not by its buildings or its wealthiest citizens, but by its character, by how it treats people who can't fight back, by whether it values justice or just power. I've spent 10 days in Red Mesa, and I've seen both the best and worst of what you are. Clara pointed to the people who'd attended the Circle T gathering. I've seen people like Harold and Margaret, Beth, Mrs. Patterson, people willing to risk everything to stand for what's right. I've seen Daniel Carter choose principle over employment. I've seen Sarah Circle refuse to surrender, even when surrender would be easier. That's the kind of character my father values. She turned back to Mitchell. But I've also seen you, Mr. Mitchell. I've seen how you use fear and economic pressure to control people. I've seen you threaten and intimidate anyone who doesn't submit to your will. I've seen you try to steal land through violence and manipulation. My father doesn't invest in communities controlled by men like you. He doesn't reward tyranny. The church had gone completely silent. Mitchell's face was red with suppressed rage. So here's what's going to happen, Clara continued. I'm going to write my father a detailed report about Red Mesa, about both the good people here and the corruption that's choking them. And he'll make his decision based on which force wins, fear or courage. If this town condemns the Circle T and surrenders completely to Mr. Mitchell's control, my father will invest elsewhere. But if this town finds its backbone and stands up for what's right, he'll bring resources and support that will break Mitchell's monopoly on power. She looked around the church, meeting as many eyes as she could. This is your choice, your real choice, not between prosperity and poverty, between two kinds of prosperity, one where you're free and one where you're controlled, one where doing right is rewarded and one where it's punished. Which Red Mesa do you want to be? Margaret Weaver stood up. I vote we support the Circle T, and I vote we tell Mr. Mitchell that his threats don't control us anymore. Beth stood next. I second that. I don't know how we'll manage, but I'd rather struggle with my dignity than prosper on my knees. More people stood. Not everyone, maybe not even half, but enough. Enough to show that Clara's test had revealed real courage beneath the fear. Mitchell watched his control crumbling with disbelief. You're all fools. You're throwing away everything I've built here for empty promises from an outsider. Maybe, Harold said, standing now. But they're promises built on respect, not fear. I'll take my chances with that. The vote, when it came, wasn't overwhelming, but it was decisive. By a margin of perhaps 60 to 40, Red Mesa chose courage over fear, principle over power, the uncertain promise of freedom over the certain comfort of submission. Mitchell stormed out of the church without another word, but everyone knew this wasn't over. He wouldn't accept defeat gracefully. The real test was still to come. Randall Mitchell spent 2 days in silent fury after the church vote, a quiet that worried those who knew him well. A loud, threatening Mitchell was predictable. Say, quiet Mitchell was planning something. Clara used those 2 days to send a detailed telegram to her father, outlining everything she'd witnessed. His response came quickly, coming personally. Arrive 3 days. Hold firm. But Clara wasn't sure they had 3 days. She could feel something building, some storm about to break. Sarah felt it too. They reinforced the Circle T's defenses as best they could with limited resources, waiting for whatever Mitchell would do next. The answer came on the third morning, just before dawn. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. She rushed to her window and saw orange flames lighting the darkness. The weaver's general store was burning. By the time Clara reached Main Street, half the town was there, bucket brigades trying desperately to save the building. But it was already too late. The store was engulfed, flames consuming decades of work in minutes. Harold and Margaret stood watching their livelihood burn, Margaret weeping against her husband's chest, Harold's face a mask of devastation. It was deliberately set, Doc Reynolds told Clara grimly. Someone poured kerosene around the foundation. This wasn't accident. This was message. The message was clear. This is what happens when you defy me. As the fire burned down to embers, Randall Mitchell appeared, looking appropriately concerned and sympathetic. "Terrible tragedy," he said loudly. "Such a loss for our community. Harold, Margaret, I hope you had insurance." "You know we didn't," Harold said, his voice hollow. "You made sure of that." "Did I?" Mitchell said with false innocence. "Well, perhaps this is what happens when people make poor decisions. Choose the wrong side, face consequences." He turned to address the gathered crowd. "Let this be a lesson. The Circle T is poison. Everyone associated with it suffers. How many more of you need to lose everything before you accept reality?" Clara felt rage building, but forced herself to stay calm. Mitchell was trying to break the town's resolve through fear and destruction. She couldn't let him succeed. "Everyone listen to me," Clara called out. "My father's telegram said he's arriving today. When he does, he'll have resources to help rebuild, not just the store, but everything Mitchell destroys. But only if we hold firm. Only if we don't let terrorism win." "Terrorism?" Mitchell laughed. Strong word for an unfortunate fire. "You have no proof I had anything to do with this." "We have no proof yet," Daniel said, stepping forward. "But we will. Someone saw something. Someone always sees something. He was right." By midday, a young boy came forward. He'd been out early checking his fishing lines when he saw two of Mitchell's ranch hands near the store with cans of kerosene. He'd been too frightened to speak up immediately, but Daniel's words had given him courage. "That's not evidence," Mitchell scoffed when confronted. "The confused testimony of a child who probably dreamed the whole thing." "Then you won't mind if we search your ranch for those kerosene cans," Clara suggested. "If your men weren't involved, there should be no evidence, correct?" Mitchell's expression turned dangerous. "You're not searching anything. I'm done with these games, Miss Whitfield. You've turned this town against itself. You've destroyed prosperity and peace. And for what? Empty promises?" "No," came a new voice. "For very real promises." Everyone turned to see a distinguished older man climbing down from a travel coach that had just arrived. He was in his 60s, dressed in expensive but practical clothing, with Clara's same intelligent eyes and determined bearing. "Father," Clara said, relief flooding through her. Thomas Whitfield surveyed the scene, the burned store, the divided townspeople, the obvious tension, and his expression hardened. He walked directly to Mitchell. "You must be Randall Mitchell. I've heard a great deal about you." He turned to the crowd. "I'm Thomas Whitfield. I came here to see firsthand what my daughter's been reporting. And I must say I'm impressed, though not with you, Mr. Mitchell." "Mr. Whitfield," Mitchell said, recovering his composure. "Welcome to Red Mesa. I'm sure your daughter has given you a very biased picture of our situation here. On the contrary, she's given me a very complete picture, including evidence of arson, intimidation, theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Thomas pulled documents from his coat. "I stopped in the territorial capital on my way here. Had some interesting conversations with judges and marshals. Turns out there are several outstanding complaints against you, Mr. Mitchell. They just needed someone with resources and credibility to pursue them seriously." Mitchell's confidence visibly cracked. "Those are baseless accusations. They're well-documented facts," Thomas interrupted. "But here's what I find most interesting. My daughter told me about this town's choice, about how, despite threats and consequences, enough people stood up for what's right. That tells me everything I need to know about Red Mesa's character." He turned to address the full assembly. "I'm prepared to invest $200,000 in this community over the next 5 years. New businesses, improvements to infrastructure, support for struggling enterprises, including rebuilding that store. But I have conditions." The crowd leaned forward, hanging on his words. "First, Randall Mitchell will sell his holdings in Red Mesa and leave. I'm prepared to buy him out at fair market value. More than generous considering the legal troubles he's facing. Second, this community will establish a proper town council with real elections, not the puppet organization Mitchell's been running. Third, the Circle T Ranch will receive support to recover and thrive. And fourth, this town will commit to being the kind of place where doing right is rewarded, not punished. He paused, letting that sink in. These aren't suggestions. They're requirements. Red Mesa can have my investment and my support, or it can keep Randall Mitchell. But it can't have both. Choose. The vote was overwhelming this time. Even people who'd sided with Mitchell previously now turned against him, seeing both his crimes exposed and a better option offered. Mitchell had no allies left, no leverage, no control. This isn't over, Mitchell hissed at Clara as he was escorted away by territorial marshals who'd accompanied Thomas Whitfield. You've destroyed everything I built. No, Clara replied calmly. I've freed everyone you've oppressed. There's a difference. 3 months later, Red Mesa looked like a different town. The weaver's store had been rebuilt, larger and better stocked than before. Beth had opened a small restaurant that quickly became the town's social center. Mrs. Patterson now owned her house outright, purchased with a loan from the Whitfield Investment Fund. The Circle T Ranch was recovering, cattle filling corrals that had been empty, fences repaired, hope restored. Clara stood on the hotel balcony, the same spot where she'd first observed Red Mesa, thinking about how much had changed. Her father had returned to his main ranch, leaving Clara to oversee the investment and transformation. She'd discovered she had a talent for this work, seeing potential in people and communities, helping them find their courage and their way forward. Sarah approached, looking healthier and happier than when they'd first met. The new ranch hands arrived tomorrow. 10 men, all vouched for, all ready to work. We're going to be all right, Clara. Better than all right. We're going to thrive. You always were going to thrive, Clara said. You just needed a chance to prove it. Daniel joined them, his hat in his hands. He'd become the foreman of the Circle T, a position where his integrity and capability finally received recognition. Town council meeting starts in an hour. You should be there. They're voting on something you'll want to hear. The church, now serving as temporary town hall until a proper one could be built, was full when Clara arrived. Harold Weaver, now the elected mayor, called the meeting to order. We have several items of business, Harold began, but first we need to address something important. Miss Clara Whitfield has been living in our hotel for 3 months, helping us rebuild, guiding us through this transition. She's become part of our community, but technically she's still a visitor. I think it's time we change that. He pulled out a document. The council has voted unanimously to offer Miss Whitfield permanent citizenship in Red Mesa, along with a formal position as Community Development Director. We're hoping she'll make this her home. Clara felt tears sting her eyes, happy tears this time. When she'd arrived 3 months ago, she'd been an outsider testing strangers. Now they were offering her belonging, the thing she'd helped them rediscover for themselves. I accept, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. With gratitude and honor, the room erupted in applause. Margaret Weaver wiped away tears. Beth rushed forward to embrace her. Sarah squeezed her hand with fierce affection. Even the people who'd initially opposed her changes now smiled with genuine warmth. After the meeting, Clara walked through Red Mesa's streets with Daniel. The evening was cooling, stars beginning to appear in the vast Texas sky. The town felt different now, not just in appearance but in spirit. People smiled at each other. Conversations were open and easy. Fear had been replaced by hope, control by community. Do you think this will last? Daniel asked. Or will they slip back into old patterns once your father's money runs out? Clara considered the question carefully. Money helped, but it isn't what really changed Red Mesa. What changed Red Mesa was people deciding to be brave, deciding that principle matters more than safety. That's not something that disappears when funding ends. That's a choice that becomes part of who you are. You gave them that, Daniel said. You tested them, pushed them, made them face who they wanted to be. No, Clara corrected gently. I gave them opportunity. They gave themselves courage. There's a difference. They stopped in front of the rebuilt general store, where Harold and Margaret were closing up for the night. Through the window, Clara could see their daughter helping count the day's receipts, the family working together, secure in their rebuilt livelihood. You know what I learned? Clara said. My father sent me to test towns, to find the good ones worth investing in. But what I discovered is that there aren't good towns and bad towns. There are just people, people who've been tested and people who haven't been. Give them the right test, show them what's possible, and most people will surprise you with their courage. Even dying cowboys begging for water. Daniel asked with a slight smile. Clara laughed, remembering Jake Morrison stumbling into town that first day. Especially dying cowboys begging for water. Because that's when you find out who people really are, when helping costs something, when kindness is inconvenient, when doing right is dangerous. That's the moment that matters. She looked at Daniel, this man who'd been the first to step forward and help, who'd chosen conscience over employment, principle over safety. You knew that already, didn't you? Before I ever arrived? Daniel shrugged. I knew what my father taught me. A man's character is measured by what he does when nobody's watching, and nobody will reward him. Guess that applies to whole towns too. As they continued walking, Clara thought about her journey, the 3 towns before Red Mesa that had failed her father's test, and this town that had passed it. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but passed it nonetheless. The dying cowboy had been a test nobody knew they were taking. Every person who'd walked past Jake Morrison that first day had made a choice about who they were. Most had failed that initial test, but Clara had given them a second chance, and many had taken it. They'd found courage they didn't know they possessed, had stood up to power they'd thought unbeatable, had chosen community over control. That was worth celebrating. That was worth building on. That was worth staying for. You know, Daniel said as they reached the edge of town, looking out over the prairie that stretched endlessly under the stars. When you first arrived, I thought you were just another rich person slumming it, pretending to care about regular people. I'm glad I was wrong. I thought you were just another cowboy, Clara admitted, someone who'd learned to survive by keeping his head down and avoiding trouble. I'm glad I was wrong too. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd found each other and a community in the most unexpected way. The test Clara had brought to Red Mesa had revealed more than just the town's character. It had revealed her own capacity for leadership, for seeing potential, for believing that people could be better than their circumstances had taught them to be. In the distance, a coyote howled, its lonely cry carrying across the prairie. But Clara didn't feel lonely. She felt surrounded by community, supported by people who'd proven themselves through trial and choice. This was home now. Not the home she'd been born to, but the home she'd helped create. And that, she realized, was the real lesson of her test. You don't just find good communities. You build them. One choice at a time. One act of courage at a time. One person willing to stand up when everyone else sits down. Red Mesa had learned that lesson. And Clara had too.